Hello everyone, how's it going? Dr. Incompetent here, and I'd like to do a review of Factorio, shall we? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what I would grade the game in a letter grading system like we're in class, and I'm going to break that down amongst certain categories. I'm going to explain what type of a game it is, and what categories it falls into, what genres it's similar to, but not spoil anything fundamentally about this game, although there's not too much to spoil except for some technological breakthroughs, I suppose. I'm also going to tell you at the second portion of this review whether or not I think you should buy this game in 2024, which is the time of the review. So, before I jump into my review, let me just talk a little bit about my experience with the game. I've played Factorio for many hours. I have a Let's Play series on the channel, which is me booting up the game for the first time and playing through the tutorial and then on into my own factory. And I also have a complete beginner's guide to Factorio. So I have a lot of experience with Factorio, and yet I am not a professional Factorio player. My factories do not look like the awesome stuff that you could see people create. I basically make spaghetti, but I get by. And I'm going to go to that point later on, which is that even if you're not great at Factorio, like I'm not great, you could still have an amazing time with Factorio. So what is Factorio? Factorio is, according to the Steam page, and here's the contextual blurb, it's a game about building and creating automated factories to produce items of increasing complexity with an infinite 2D world. Use your imagination to design your factory, combine simple elements into ingenious structures, and finally protect it from the creatures who don't really like you. So the user-defined tags for this are automation, base building, resource management, and on and on. And that is what this game is. It is, well, factory is in name. You're going to build a factory, but you're going to build the largest factory that you ever thought possible, and then build an even bigger one, and then an even bigger one, because as the game description says here on the Steam page, it's an infinite 2D world. Factorio is basically the penultimate archetypal genre-defining automation game, base building, factory building automation game. It is, in that way, a must-play simply because it is the staple, the standard. It is the game where you look at even Satisfactory, for example, and you say, oh, it's like Factorio, but 3D. Like, people will bring this up as the point of reference for the entire genre of game. Now, of course, there are games that were building factories and systems of production and automation before Factorio. But for me, this is the kind of gold standard of this type of game. It doesn't mean that it's a flawless game, but it means that it is, at its core, a fundamentally important factory building automation game. It also has a base defense component, as you've got this kind of like real-time strategy element of enemies attacking your factory that you have to defend against. But if you're like me, you might choose to just not even play with biters. Now, some people could consider that to be, an abomination, sacrilegious to do. But what's cool is you can choose to do that. Someday I might try a factory with biters, but I personally just like to vibe out and build my factory and just not worry about that extra element, because I can barely handle intellectually what's going on with the numbers and the logistics, let alone angry things trying to blow up my base. But to each their own, and that's one of the great strengths of Factorio, is the customization, the depth, the ability for the game to give your imagination a canvas with which to articulate your desires for building a factory. And that is another reason that it is such a fantastic achievement. So we know that Factorio is a base building, resource management, automation game in a 2D setting, But let's talk now about my review of the game. Now, the first thing I like to talk about when I get into my review is the fun factor. Is Factorio fun? And it's an interesting one because, well, yes, of course, I think it's fun. I think it's amazingly fun, but it's not edge of your seat, thrill a minute fun. It's kind of like, oh, wait a minute, 5 hours have passed and I just sat down fun. It's extremely addicting, and it is a game that is a kind of not like a logic puzzle, but it's an intellectual puzzle for you to chew on, for you to tinker with, and time just vanishes when you're playing it. So it's incredibly fun to get something working, to tinker away, to have it all come together, and to make that progress, to develop that new technology and, get that train working or optimize a certain region, facilitate a bottleneck, whatever you're doing, it's fun. That being said, it is worth mentioning, and I'll talk about this more in the second portion of the review where I say, is this a game you should buy and play in 2024? It is a hard game up front. There is an incredible learning curve to the game, a curve that I'm not even over. Like, I have still so much more to learn about the game. But I feel that it's fun enough to be worth it, and the sense of satisfaction that you get when something comes together and works is just sublime. It's like in Dwarf Fortress, where, you want to do something incredibly complicated, like, set up and automate cheese production. I don't know. And, you get everything done for that. You get all the workers set, and then you let it go and you see, oh my gosh, this person is actually getting cheese and they're putting it into the storage and it works. And this person's eating the cheese and you're so happy. Same thing in Factorio. You do something and you're like, well, I think if I, bring in this copper from over here and then I make the plates here and then I get this going, and then you see on your assembly lines, you see it start filling back up, you see it working, you see the train route you've set up going back and forth. It is incredible. So even though it's really hard, it makes it all the more worthwhile when you get it done, you get it working, and there's always something new to learn in the game. So yes, I think this is a very fun game. It's a great way to spend some time, and maybe even thousands of hours if you're a true Factorio aficionado. Next, I'd like to talk about the controls. How does this game control? Given what the game is asking you to do, build a factory, does it control smoothly and intuitively? Yes. Short answer is yes, but the long answer is not all the time. And so here's what I mean. First of all, the controls require a lot of upfront learning. There's some stuff that's not intuitive, and once you learn that, it becomes second nature, but there's a lot of key binding and quirkiness. So one of the things that's strange to me personally about the control is that you have an avatar in the game. Because it's a top-down game that feels very much like StarCraft in the sense that it's real-time and there's like the Zerg attacking you, that's kind of the initial vibe I got. It's weird that you are limited by your avatar and you have to run around this person and you can't reach wherever your mouse can reach because they have to be close to it. Like, you get used to it, but it's a kind of second step that maybe most people are probably like, what? That doesn't even bother me at all. It's not like it bothers me. It's just something that I wasn't expecting when I saw the game. In Satisfactory, it makes sense. Like, I'm controlling the game from this locked first-person perspective. But in Factorio, because I see everything from top down, I'm kind of like, well, why can't I just reach that? Or why can't I touch that? You can do things and you learn using, shift and other things how to expand your reach, and there are mods to do things. But when I'm reviewing this based on the vanilla game, by the way, the controls are fine. There are some quirks with them for sure. There is some strangeness with how certain things interact, and that's part of the charm and the fun that you learn. Overall, I think the controls do work okay. I've got no massive beef with them, but I mean, like I say in my beginner's guide, learning things like the Q key, for example, are just absolutely vital game changers of how do I even get this thing out of my hand? I don't want this here, and granted, once you've put a bunch of hours into it, it's all second nature. It's no big deal. But there is a bit of a learning curve with it, and it is worth mentioning that you're controlling a character that you have to move and run around, and they have to be able to get through things, and certain things they can't walk through, and you have to go around, and you can get hit, you can get killed by your own trains, and on and on and on. So, for the most part, yes, the controls work well, but the real thing about the controls that work well, for me, is the building of the factory. Being able to use the mouse to fine-tune and drag your conveyor belts and such is a godsend when you come from, maybe you've played Satisfactory or Tectonica or these other like 3D builders. Those look better, but they aren't always the easiest to get laid out just like you would enjoy because of the perspective. At least that's my take on it. All right, so now when we dive deeper into the controls, another element I like to talk about are the UI and the systems in the game. So these are kind of like a subset of controls. How about the systems in the game, and how about the UI in the game? First, let's talk about the UI. The UI is okay for this game. It's informative, and there's lots of windows that you can open, but it's not a strong suit of the game, in my opinion. You'll get used to it, but it's something that isn't always the easiest to read and navigate, at least for a new player. And I think this is an area of the game that could be improved. It's nitpicky, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It's simplistic, but there are some things that could be punched up with how the UI works for me. It functions fine. You're not going to lose things. The UI is pretty cohesive with how the different elements work together, so it's not like a total deal breaker or anything. It's just something that I think could be elevated slightly, but works pretty well. Now, what about the systems? So the systems are like crafting, logistics, automation, transportation, and for the most part, this Factorio does this stuff great. One caveat I would say would be trains are it takes a bit to get it working exactly as you'd like, setting up the stops, getting the track to work, getting things to unload, getting it to, go where you want. It takes a second. It's not always the easiest, but at the same time, once you get it, it's like a learned skill and it's no problem. So for the most part, I think that the systems are clean, intuitive. They take like all things, it takes a second to learn, construction time, what resources do I need, how do I work this inserter, and so on. But once you get it, it is amazingly consistent throughout the game. And if the systems didn't work in Factorio, you couldn't play the game. It's an achievement that you can have these systems running to infinity and it still works. So I would say the systems are really, really good. Some of them are maybe a little quirky or wonky, but you'll get them with practice. The next element I like to talk about in my reviews of games is the story. Well, Factorio doesn't really have much of one. There's a bare bones draw, but you're not playing this game for story or for lore. You are playing this to build and grow a factory. So this is one of those games like Mario Brothers where there may be some, perfunctory, overarching narrative that is introduced and doesn't really play into the game that much, or doesn't really matter that much to the fun of the game, right? And that's this game. Like Mario Kart is super fun, the story does not matter. So that is the same thing for Factorio. This is an incredibly fun and important and cool game, and story is just not really a thing that matters or happens in the game. Now, I'd like to talk about the visuals, the graphics. How does this game look? This is a bit of a double-edged sword. I think the game is cool in the sense that it has a retro 2D pixelated vibe to it. Like I said, StarCraft, old StarCraft vibes. It feels like a 1990s style game in its presentation. But this is one area of the game that could be enhanced. The visuals, for me, are a little bit muddy. The color palette is not always the most pleasing, and sometimes it's not clear like what I'm looking at in my inventory maybe, but for the most part, like the graphics work fine, and you have to imagine that on this scale, it's not easy to make something that just takes your breath away. But it is worth mentioning that this is not a game that for the most part you're going to be like, man, that looks sick. What you're going to say looks sick is the factory that somebody builds, like the solution that they make to the puzzle of the game. That's going to be beautiful, but the game itself is not beautiful, if that makes any sense. The audio, honestly, how is the audio for this game? How are the sound effects? How is the music? I think the audio is good for Factorio. I like the music, the soundtrack. I remember it, but it's not something I'm humming. It's just there, and it's pleasant while you're spending hours and hours inside your factory, but it is not something that, blows me away. The sound effects for like an achievement or doing something are cool. They make you feel good, and it's all serviceable and fine. It's again not breathtaking, but I like the music in the game, and it works well for providing some soundtrack to my factory building. I, for example, do not put on like Spotify while I'm playing Factorio. I listen to the game music. Now let's talk about style. How does everything in this game tie together? Does it have a sense of style? What I always say about style for my game reviews is, does this game feel like it has a soul? Does it feel like it is a work of art that is saying something and is not alive, but feels not empty? Like, there are some games that are beautiful, but they have no soul. They're empty shells. It's just like meh. And it feels, or some games just feel generic. They don't feel like they have any identity or anything. This is not Factorio. Factorio oozes style because it is a one-of-a-kind, generational, and at this point, formative and archetypal automation experience. It is the genre-defining title for now. I mean, you've got awesome games in this space. You've got Dyson Sphere, you've got Satisfactory, right? And you have other games, Shapes, that do automation. But Factorio is, at least for me, the iconic title that you come back to as a point of reference. So that speaks to the style of the game, and yes, it has a great sense of style. So how do I bring that all together into a grade? How do I grade Factorio? What I like to do before I reveal my grade is serve a reference to provide a basis or a baseline, which is the Steam reviews and the Metacritic reviews. So Factorio on Steam has 142,000 overwhelmingly positive reviews. And Factorio on Metacritic, it only has 8 critic reviews, but it has a 90. And from users, it has an 8.8. And that's about right where I am at with Factorio. Factorio, for me, is an A. I give Factorio an A because it is such an important jewel of a game. It is going to be a generational title. It is going to be a game that, it's a grade. I'm giving it a grade. If my student, and I had a class on game design, submitted Factorio, you get an A. My God, you've done something amazing. Now, I don't give Factorio an A+, because you have to imagine that classroom space to be all games possible. And so I have some reservations about Factorio. I almost even flirted with an A- because of some of them, but ultimately I felt like this is an A. This is just an amazing game. There are people who love Factorio, who live and breathe Factorio, who have thousands of hours in Factorio, who would, without hesitation, give it an A+, and I totally understand that. For me, I think it's an amazing game, and I give it an A. What the small detractors, and we're talking about splitting hairs, and we're talking about granular stuff, because it's the difference between an A+ and an A. The small detractors are the graphics aren't great, the UI and some of the systems are could be punched up. There's a little bit of wonkiness, and the learning curve is massive. But even given those small detractors, I think this is an awesome, awesome game. It's super fun, and it's an intellectual exercise. Like, there are a few moments in gaming where your brain hurts. You know, it's not because there's just a mess of enemies and you're just slogging through loot or whatever. It's like, I am solving a puzzle. I am, you could think of it as a coding simulator or a factory automation simulator. It is to that level of, I am optimizing this incredibly complex, convoluted system. I am trying to organize this. I am problem solving. I am patching up a system. I am expanding. There is so much stuff that you're doing that's awesome, and the fact that you can do it to an infinite scale is remarkable. This game gets an A because Factorio is a remarkable achievement in my opinion. Again, I don't think it's perfect, but it's awesome. So, that being said, the fact that I give it an A, I'd love to know what you think of Factorio in the comments below. Do you agree with me on my grade, my high points, the few nitpicky small points I have with this game? Or do you disagree? What's your take on it? Please leave your grade in the comments below and give me your thoughts on Factorio. Additionally, what I like to do in these reviews, now that I've given my grade, is I like to talk about, should you buy and play Factorio now? This game came out in 2020, 4 years later. Should you buy the game? And I evaluate this on several different pieces of criteria. First of all, I like to do it in terms of genre. Like, do you like these types of games? If you like automation, factory building, games that make you think, puzzle games, games about sprawl, building games, then yes, you would like Factorio. And I think that anybody who has any interest in those should at least try Factorio because it's so iconic and formative. Now, that being said, I also like to talk in my Should You Buy It section on, is the game difficult? And actually, Factorio is difficult. Not in the way that it's twitchy and you have to memorize a combat pattern or you have to be really skilled, but difficult in the sense that it is a steep learning curve. It can blow your mind how many options you have, what you can do. There's lots of key bindings and controls. You're looking at lots of numbers. You've got graphs. So I think that there is a learning curve to the game. Now, I have a beginner's guide if you want to check it out and see how to get into this game. I recommend playing in passive just to learn the fundamentals before you introduce biters, because it's a lot to just try to build a factory and be attacked at the same time if you don't even know the controls. But some players like to just dive in the deep end, and that's how they approach it. You have to think about, if you're saying, should I play the game? What's your appetite for difficulty and for using your noggin? If you don't want to think, this might not be the game for you. Now, granted, I can zone out and just be, in vibing and playing the game, but you're still using your brain. You're still challenging your brain. If that's not for you, then Factorio might not be for you. Now, after I talk about the difficulty, I talk about the value of the game. The value of Factorio is staggering. How is it staggering? It's staggering because Factorio, right now, it's $35. $35, some people might be like, oh, for a game that looks like that, that's crazy. For a 4-year-old game, that's crazy. It's not crazy, in my opinion. Factorio is a game that you can sink hundreds, if not thousands of hours into. It's infinite in scale. You can do different maps. You can play multiplayer. You can try different scenarios. You can mod the game. You can tinker and tweak the game to your liking. You can play more biters, less biters, no water, lots of water. You can do all sorts of things to change the game, and the sky is the proverbial limit as you're trying to launch a rocket as your goal, but really it's set your own goals. So I think, for me, the value for the money, this is one of those, like Civilization. You could just play this forever and be fine with it. So I think the value is through the roof on this game. What about replayability? Same thing. Insane. This is a game that you could play again and again and again, and you want to, because every time you play Factorio, you're better than you were before. You know more about the game, and you can solve the problems faster. You can optimize better. You start with a clean slate. You can, put new parameters on the game. Like I said, you can mod it, you can multiplayer it. So I think the replayability is also phenomenally high. So what is my overall recommendation of should you play it? Is it only for people who love automation games, or is it for everyone? This is going to be interesting, but I honestly think that most people should at least try Factorio. I don't universally recommend Factorio. Like Subnautica, play it. Like, anybody can jump in and play that. This isn't a game, for a 5-year-old probably. This isn't right. And this isn't a game for somebody who's never played a game before. And then I take that back. You could be like an engineering person who's never played a video game, and this could be the only video game that you ever play. What I mean to say is this can be a challenging game, so you have to go in accepting that you need to learn it and that you will be rewarded by learning it. If you can go in knowing that there is a bit up front that you have to put in, then yes, I recommend this game. I recommend this game to people who like building, automation, seeing what's out there in the gaming world, seeing what people can do when they create games, because this is that kind of a game. This is an expression of a genre, of pushing the genre, of defining this genre. So I recommend this to a lot of players. If you only play first-person shooters and that's your bag, or you only play FIFA, or you only play, Smash Brothers or something, and that's all you want to play, then that's fine. This might not be for you. But if you're a person who can keep an open mind, can accept that there is a little bit of a challenge up front, or a lot of a challenge up front, then this could be for you. All right, everybody. So that is my all-encompassing statement about Factorio, my grade of Factorio, which is an A, and my recommendation of should you play it, which is probably you should, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime genre-defining moment. Not saying that there won't be another Factorio or another game that does this better, but this is an incredibly important game that will be remembered and played for years and years to come. Also, worth mentioning, it's a game that still gets updates. It's a game that was just updated recently, so that is happening. Okay, everybody, let me know what you think of this long review in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think I got it right with how to evaluate Factorio and how to recommend Factorio for new players in 2024? Also, again, I do have a Let's Play and a beginner's guide to Factorio. I will link those in the description below if you're interested. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Take care.